Hey, I'm so happy to open yet another of these meetings. I haven't seen my screen been filled up like this since COVID. It's truly amazing the attractiveness of the SETI annual workshop. So as Kirsten said, it's the 9th. So I'm expecting a big celebration next year for the 10th anniversary. And I can only congratulate the organizers for yet again having such a fantastic workshop. So many presentations. Also, it seems like you're increasing the cut, so it's even difficult to get into this workshop now, given everybody the great interest for it. But just a few words about the importance also of energy transition in general in the world is, of course, still rightly one of the hottest topics that we could spend our time on as researchers. But SETI has a particular role within the EFD network. So we have, of course, 12 centers in the Global South. We have 9 academic partners, including Duke, and of course, Concepcion is one of the centers. But then we have the 5 collaborative programs, and over the years, it has always been SETI who has been leading the way, showing how it could be done. And we're just so incredibly proud to have SETI as part of the broader EFD family. And we are gaining so much and learning so much from your work. So thank you so much, all of you, but particularly Marcel and Mark, who are carrying a heavy weight in leading this collaborative forward and having great impact in the world. So I wish you the best in your deliberations here in the workshop, and over to who? To Mark or Marcel, like to start?
So Mark. Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gunnar.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gunnar. It's always great to see you at these meetings, and the support is definitely welcome and appreciated. I'll be brief because I'll be leading the policy session that's about to kick off, which I think is an exciting session, and I'll tell you a little bit about how it was put together, how it came into being, as we have some special guests joining us for that. But I'm a professor at Duke University in public policy and global health, and I've been affiliated with SETI since the beginning, and kind of seeing it grow, and very excited about all of the developments that have been happening within the network, and appreciative of the participation from all parts of the world, really, because we learn from each other, and that's the value of SETI, is this comparative perspective. And also, one of our primary goals is to empower researchers in the Global South to do this work. So I think you'll see that throughout the program. As Gunnar said, it was actually very difficult this year. We had a lot of paper submissions and couldn't accept all of them because a virtual workshop has to be fairly contained. And we already have a lot of parallel sessions, which is somewhat of a shame, because people kind of will split apart and not hear every paper. But that's also with the idea of trying to accommodate as many presenters as possible. Maybe I'll stop there because you'll hear from me more briefly in the coming session, and pass it to Marcela.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning and afternoon, everyone. I warmly welcome you all to our 9th workshop. I am Marcela Jaime. I am an associate professor at the Universidad of Concepcion in Chile, and I am really happy to be here today. I want also to thank Gunnar and Mark for all of this initiative. Like some of you guys here are postgraduate students, and at least to my own experience, Gunnar and Mark brought me out of my right after my PhD study to dream about this initiative. So it's been 9 years since then. So it's really an honor to be here. And today we are discussing about today and tomorrow. We will be discussing about policy relevant energy transitions. We will start with a very interesting panel, a policy section that will be moderated by Mark and Amin. And I want to invite you all to stay connected and participate during these 2 years. We have participants from 18 countries in 4 continents. 9 of them are postgraduate students that deserve to receive meaningful feedback for their research. And because we are interested on just transitions, we are also happy to get to know from our statistics that we have 51% of female participation among the panelists and in paper presentation. So just without spending most of your time, I welcome you and invite you to enjoy this meeting and to have meaningful discussions during these days. So thank you so much and welcome all.
Good. Thank you very much, Gunnar, Marcela, and Mark, for your introductions. So we have to move now to our first session of the workshop, this policy panel called Advancing Policy Relevant Energy Transitions Research in Africa, the Challenges and Opportunities, which will be moderated by Mark Julian from Duke University and Amin Karimo from University of Cape Town. So Mark, I will leave you the floor now to start the session. Thank you very much, Marcela and Gunnar.
Yeah, thank you, Cristobal. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. Are people seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is introduce this session, which is growing out of a recent collaboration that I had while I was on sabbatical with the University of Cape Town, a short course that was put together around advancing policy relevant energy transitions research. And we have put together a panel that I'll tell you a little bit more the composition of. And we'll hear from each of 3 presenters during that the first part of the session. Afterwards, Amin will offer some comments on the various ideas that we've heard, and we'll open it up for a more general discussion, including some moderated questions if necessary, but also eager to just hear from the audience more generally if there are sufficient questions that emerge. Okay, so let me see. Okay, so let me say a few things here in terms of introduction. So this session is largely based around a short course that was offered at the University of Cape Town in the Department of Economics over the period from March to May of 2024. And the course was called The Economics of Energy Transitions, Concepts, Methods, and Research for Policymaking. It was delivered in 3 modules. 2 of them were virtual, and then there was an in-person component. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what the purpose of that was. Big thanks for sponsorship of this course and making it possible from Environment for Development and SETA as the funder of an EFD, which made some policy funds available for that course. And most of the expenditures were associated with the in-person element in Cape Town. My own time was covered by a Fulbright Fellowship that's from the State Department of the U.S., which allowed me to spend about 10 months in Cape Town, and that capped with that course being offered at the very end. Of course, the course would never have been possible without EPRU, the Environmental Policy Research Unit at the University of Cape Town, which is an EFD center. And especially Amin, who was my co-instructor and sort of helped with the brain trust in terms of developing the course and what should be in it. And then the administrative support that we had from EPRU as well, Felicity there, and June Titus, who helped arrange all kinds of logistics associated with the course, and Ashi was also involved in helping to sort through applications when people were applying. SETI, of course, also contributed through the vibrant network of scholars and the research that we featured very prominently in the course. And then, of course, the participants. There were about 40 for the whole online that registered, although all the materials are also being made available publicly for a broader set. And then in Cape Town, we had 27 people attend for the intensive in-person component of it. And for me, it was really an absolute pleasure to participate in this initiative. I think it was successful, especially considering that it was the first time we tried it. And one of the big experiments of this course was putting both researchers and policymakers together to think about what the research gaps were in terms of energy transition and to work on proposals for their own specific settings. And obviously, there's always room for improvement. We hope to offer similar courses in the future, of course, conditional on funding. And so, we're eager to hear ideas about how to take the course forward. What are we going to do today? So I'll start with a bit of talking about the course, why we did this, what the learning objectives were, and how it was structured. So going slightly beyond what I've just said. And then we'll have presentations of 3 proposal ideas that emerged from the workshop. We invited one person was unable to attend, unfortunately. That's Eden from Ethiopia, who had a family emergency, so is unable to participate today, unfortunately. But I will say that each of 27 participants in the in-person course were tasked with developing and presenting an idea, and we had a light competition within the course itself to choose the top 3. And those 3 plus a 4th have been invited today to present in this session on their ideas for policy relevant research. So we'll be hearing from June from Uganda, Shishir from Nepal, and Riza from Zambia about their proposals and engaging in a discussion of that in this moderated question and answer session that I will lead. And then we'll close with closing remarks. Okay, so, very briefly, broad overview, this is how we started also the course. What's the motivation for thinking about energy transition? Well, energy, being this sort of golden thread that the UN has talked about that connects economic growth, social equity, and environmental sustainability. And, the promise that modern energy can do so many things, right, in theory, provide health benefits by avoiding exposure to pollution that's from traditional energy sources, allowing studying at night, productive uses like pumping of water for agriculture, preservation of food, and keeping medicines cold, allowing acquisition of time-saving appliances, which cut down on drudgery, and then, all kinds of small business development opportunities as well as larger business. And the key point here is that energy poverty has impacts that cut across scales, both at sort of very micro household kind of level, but all the way up to a broader economy level. But of course, there are questions about whether energy interventions themselves are really a golden thread. How, when, how do they need to be designed, and what's the role of policy for really aligning incentives properly, and thinking about ways, particularly to preserve the environment. So, we have these very broad stylized facts where globally energy transition is still in many places really about energy access and not having access to modern energy sources. So, almost 1 billion people not having electricity, and many more than that not having reliable electricity, as well as people cooking with polluting cooking technology. And so these energy poverty impacts really, inhibit many of those positive economic outcomes that we would hope for. And it's argued that poor access is really one of the key things that's constraining economic development and growth, increasing inequality, damaging health and the environment globally. Of course, these stylized facts hide lots of general and local complexity. And solutions that work in one place may not work elsewhere because of the complex contextual economics of particular locations. So the SETI network is really built on this presumption that research that's both attuned to local realities and policy needs is needed, but also that leverages comparative learning and a network of researchers that have this deep local and general knowledge. And then what we've been trying to do gradually more of, but is always challenging, is really embedding this within a research and policy interaction. So building capacity to ask relevant policy questions, appreciate and conduct rigorous research, and sometimes policymakers may not need to have to conduct it themselves. They can partner with researchers, but our goal is to generate appreciation for what rigorous research can bring. And on the other side, researchers often don't know the right questions to answer the key problems that are facing particular locations. So listening to policymakers about what those key problems are, and all becoming smarter consumers of research findings and better sources of demand for research. So I want to talk a little bit more about why this course was structured as it was, and then we'll go to the panelists. But at the end of the course, we wanted participants to be able to really understand and appreciate these links between energy and development, how they're complex and dependent on context, and what they look like at both the micro and macroeconomic level. At the same time, having a deeper appreciation of the welfare trade-offs that come with different energy technologies, because you often hear this sort of simplistic narrative that low-income economies just need to develop their energy systems. But there are welfare trade-offs in developing those energy systems in the wrong way, perhaps. And so understanding those trade-offs. Then demonstrating functional understanding of quantitative empirical methods that can be used to study the effectiveness of interventions. And so this is mostly about impact evaluation methods, but also other kinds of analytical methods that social scientists and economists use to understand the impacts of interventions. And finally, for the in-person component of the course, was really to build this practical experience in framing an energy transition problem facing each participant's context, and then articulating how an economic research agenda could inform solutions to that problem. And working in sort of this kind of intensive way with the course instructors and with team members who are peers to develop those proposals in a more effective way. So it had 3 modules. 2 of these were online. That was really about what we know about energy transition dynamics in lower and middle income countries, highlighting knowledge gaps, and then thinking about methods that could be used to evaluate actions. And then this kind of in-person component, which was a week-long proposal development, bootcamp, and coaching. And these materials are available upon request if you email us. But we have the idea that we'll sort of make these more generally available through a website once that development happens, at least the materials in modules 1 and 2. Module 3 is a little bit more kind of dependent on in-person activity. And really the course then was built around this framework that evaluations to be policy relevant, it's not enough to just think about the rigor or the internal validity of an evaluation, which is the extent to which we're confident that the impacts that we measure are really attributable to the interventions we're assessing. And that's really what economists and researchers tend to emphasize, but also that these evaluations need to provide relevant evidence. So relevance in terms of answering the right question, filling key gaps in knowledge, and also contributing to generalizable knowledge. And then, being practical, where we balance issues of cost with sort of timeliness of delivering results when policymakers need them, and being flexible to changing conditions on the ground. So that calls for a really sustained policy research interaction where decision makers are the ones who have the best understanding of the questions that need answers. And then researchers are paired with them to help them answer those questions and figure out how to best answer those questions, with both, sort of engaging in this give and take, balancing the sort of practical considerations against the validity considerations. And being flexible to achieve the best results possible. And so we had both of these types of constituencies, researchers and policymakers, engaging in the course. In that proposal development bootcamp, as I said, the goal was to sort of describe a problem and propose a research agenda that would solve that problem. It needed to be relevant to the context that the participant was most familiar with or working in. And participants did a preparatory assignment just prior to coming to Cape Town, where they described the problem they wanted to work on. A general observation from that was that these problems were very broad in scope to start. And so, we worked hard to try to force narrowing of that and really focusing on knowledge gaps rather than, problems that might have sort of general solutions, but where, there was less focus on the details. And then while in Cape Town, the participants really worked on polishing and refining these problem descriptions and creating a research plan to create evidence for tackling the problem. We had in-depth training and feedback throughout the course, and then 2 rounds of competition. So the 27 people were in 7 groups roughly, and then from each of those groups, a winner was chosen to present on the final day in the final stage of the competition. And that's when we ranked the top 3 ideas. And you'll hear some of those today. Okay, so without further ado, I then next want to open it up to those presentations. And we are going to go in the following order. So June will kick us off. June Nyakahuma, I'll let her introduce herself at the beginning of her presentation, but she's from Uganda. And then so June will have about 10 minutes, and we won't take questions immediately. We'll just go to the next presenter after that, who I will introduce. And then at the very end, we'll kind of gather questions from the group or feedback, but also feel free to put in the chat at any time questions. And the presenters, you should feel free to answer questions in the chat if you'd like, even when the other presentations are going. But we're in for an exciting set of presentations. And June, over to you. Do you want to see if you can share your screen?
Thank you, Mark. Can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay.
You have to hit the share screen button and then probably choose your window.
Oh, okay. Are you
Yeah.
able to see it now?
We can see it now.
Okay. Just a second. Okay. So good afternoon and good morning, everyone. My name is June Nyakahuma, an economist in the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, Uganda. My research proposal is on barriers to and opportunities for scaling up LPG uptake in Uganda. So I'll go straight to the background or introduction. Uganda is currently one of the top 10 cooking energy poverty hotspots in the world. And currently, less than 6% of the population has access to clean cooking energy, with a majority of households, about 95%, relying on firewood or charcoal. So using charcoal and firewood has negative impacts on the environment, given the high deforestation rate that we're already facing in the country. And research also indicates that maybe at about in 2017, our deforestation was occurring at a rate of approximately 50,000 hectares annually. So if we continue to use charcoal and firewood, this is going to worsen, and maybe in the next 40 years, we won't have any forest cover left. But overall, using dirty fuels like charcoal and firewood has negative impacts for climate, public health, and gender outcomes. So currently, LPG is being looked at or highlighted as a potential solution, both in our energy policy and the Just Energy Transition Plan as at 2023, because LPG it burns more efficiently, so you spend less time cooking, which has positive impacts for gender. And then it also produces less carbon and particulates, so we'll have and less impacts on public health if we transition to using LPG. But our usage is still low at 1.5% nationally. But so my research seeks to find out why in Uganda in particular, LPG uptake is still low, given that there's been numerous interventions by government to increase its uptake, so that we can better design incentives to support its uptake. And I intend to do this qualitatively through household surveys to get first-hand insights on why households still prefer to use the dirty cooking fuels. And then for the fiscal incentives to support its uptake, I intend to do this quantitatively through randomized control trials. This will support the government policy of achieving 50% access to clean cooking energy by 2040, including policy coherence with the recent ban on charcoal trade in the north and northeastern parts of Uganda. Onto the problem statement. Government has implemented several policies and incentives to promote clean cooking and to reduce reliance on traditional biomass. For example, in our National Development Plan 3 that's ending this fiscal year, there's a target to increase access to LPG from 1 to 8% by 2025, and we're already falling short of that target. Then there's also tax incentives like VAT is, LPG is VAT exempt, but this has not necessarily translated into lower costs of gas. And of recent, I think this is the second year of implementation, the Ministry of Energy is implementing a project to increase, to distribute 1 million LPG kits, that's the cylinder and stoves, to households and schools. And this is estimated to save about 35% of firewood per user. So much as there are already incentives, and some have been going on for a while, they are targeted at urban households, and they haven't necessarily increased uptake nationally. And given the statistics, if you look at the graph on the right, usage is varying from 0.2% in rural areas. You can barely see it on the graph, on the rural area graph. And then in Kampala, as a representation of the urban areas, it's 7.6%. So There's growing political will to support transition to clean cooking energy, given the recent executive ban on charcoal trade by the president. That's in the north and northeastern Uganda. And this calls for careful consideration in developing policies to support rural households, especially in this area, to get alternatives to clean cooking for policy coherence. Also, there's an opportunity for local LPG production, given that we are moving into the commercial production of oil and gas, and it's estimated that we'll produce about 100 metric tons of gas. So it's important that we get the right incentives to scale up national LPG uptake. This could be incentives on pricing, making it cheaper, depending on what my research findings will be. So there's already been research in the area, and literature review indicates that the barriers of uptake of LPG differ from one country to another, but they are common across nations, with cost barriers being the most significant. And according to Puzzolo et al. 2020, the barriers to LPG uptake in low and middle income countries include high initial capital costs for acquiring LPG equipment, and affordability, and also the cost of refills for low-income households. Then similarly in Uganda, our Just Energy Transition Plan and a recent market assessment indicate that high cost barriers are one of the biggest hindrances to LPG uptake for households. So the challenges are well documented in our available literature. However, this research mostly covers urban areas. So there's no particular research that has been done on rural areas or low-income households that are outside of urban areas. And this is also, it explains why impact evaluation for most of the incentives that have been implemented in other countries indicate that there's limited effectiveness of policy incentives. For example, in Morocco, when subsidies were phased out, it showed that only the urban households were able to sustain usage of LPG. So it didn't really help low-income households. So it was important that they designed incentives specifically targeted for low-income households. Then in Ghana, it was still the same story. So the net increment in national LPG usage was not significant, even after incentives were phased out. So my research questions would then be, my research questions seek to cover the gap in literature or in research that has been done in the area. And the first question is, what are the barriers to LPG uptake by low-income households in Uganda? My focus is on the north and northeastern region, because this is where the charcoal ban has been effected in Uganda. So it's important to support households in this region transition, but it's also a good area to study, because these are the households that are most impacted by this transition. Then, depending on the findings, the second question should be what fiscal policy instruments or incentives can support uptake of LPG, especially for low-income households. I'll move on to the methodology for the first question. What the barriers to LPG uptake by low-income households are. I intend to do this qualitatively, qualitative synthesis and household surveys in the north and northeastern Uganda for first-hand insights, because as I already mentioned, most of the research that's documented is in urban areas. So it's important to get first-hand insights. It could be maybe it's cultural barriers in these areas. So that should inform the specific incentives that we intend to implement as government for effectiveness. So on to the second question on the policy instruments to support LPG uptake for low-income households. I intend to use quantitative methods, randomized control trial methods, by selecting representative sample of households and dividing them into a treatment and control group. So depending on the outcomes of the surveys, designing the specific intervention to support LPG uptake. It could be a subsidized cost of gas, or maybe they just want equipment. But overall, the outcome of the research should guide the design of appropriate incentives to support LPG uptake. So in conclusion, our energy policy of 2023 government aims to achieve 50% clean cooking energy access by 2040. So it's important to support households affected by the recent ban on charcoal trade to transition to cleaner cooking energy for policy coherence, but also it's important to determine the appropriate fiscal incentives in supporting the energy transition, especially before commercial oil and gas production begins. It could be that we need to get the pricing right? But then we also need to maybe educate these households or sensitize them more or train them on safety. So yeah, my research intends to fill that gap so that government can effectively support households to transition to cleaner cooking energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, June. And maybe we can give a brief round of applause as we prepare for the next speaker, who will be Shishir Shrestha from Nepal. And Shishir is, I think you're maybe in an unstable internet place, but it looks okay to me. So seems like it's working fine.
Yeah, it looks okay till now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
hello everyone. So I can go, Mark, I guess.
yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
Okay. Hello everyone. My name is Shishir. I work as a researcher at International Water Management Institute in Nepal. So basically my background is sort of a renewable energy, but like I have been involved in research around solar irrigation in South Asia mostly. In this presentation, I'll basically be discussing, a fee-for-service model for microsolar irrigation and like a scalable or more sustainable business model. Like, can that be done? In the context of Nepal, I'll be speaking, but like it is much more relevant to like other parts of South Asia and also parts of Africa. Here. So my broader policy question is, can fee-for-service model for microsolar irrigation farm be scalable and sustainable? Basically, I want to start with the problem that we have. The government solar irrigation program in Nepal it did a very good job in terms of like promoting solar irrigation as a technology, but like in terms of scalability, it has been struggling. So I'm proposing let's target microsolar irrigation because most of the farmers in Nepal are smallholders, and let's do fee-for-service model rather than individual ownership because that will improve the utilization factor for the pumps, which means like quicker returns on investment for the investor. And the policy that I want to target here is the renewable energy policy in Nepal that directs the subsidy delivery mechanism that is subsidizing the solar irrigation programs in Nepal. So the approach is to do an intervention pilot for a proof of concept for a fee-for-service model for microsolar irrigation. So to begin with, so this is the map of Nepal. Nepal lies between India and China. So the area where I want to focus is the green sort of a strip of area in the south bordering India. That's where the Tarai Plains are. So the Tarai Plains are basically this groundwater-rich Indo-Gangetic plains, very rich, fertile soil and like good groundwater resources. In Nepal, we have around 8.8 to 11.6 billion cubic meter of annual groundwater reserve, and only 22% of that reserve is being utilized. So given the lack of surface irrigation that we have, groundwater has a potential to meet the unmet irrigation demand for supplying year-round irrigation for most of the farmers in Nepal. And to get to the groundwater, you need energy. So that's where, to pump the water from the groundwater to make it available for irrigation. Diesel pumps has been historically quite popular in Nepal, but their operational cost is quite high. They are expensive and they are polluting. So electric pumps is another good alternative because the grid in Nepal is green. Most of the grid comes from hydropower, but the access to the grid, especially in the farmlands, are quite limited. So solar pumps has been gaining traction over the years, but it hasn't been scaled. There's a big demand. The government receives around 10,000 applications each year to get the subsidized pump, but they can only install around 300 pumps in a year. So the problem that I stated, the problem is not that the farmer are not adopting solar irrigation, but they want to adopt it, but like they need subsidy to curtail the high upfront capital investment that is necessary. And the government subsidy mode program is dependent on the subsidy budget that they have. And due to the lack of subsidy budget that they have, the number of pumps that they can install has been limited. And the government, the subsidy program, they provide 60% flat blanket subsidy to the farmers, be it the smallholders, be it like wealthy farmers, they get a blanket 60% subsidy. And in the program started from 2016, and in the last like 9-10 years, they have already installed like around 3,300 pumps. And these are not like large pumps; these are like 1 HP and 2 HP medium size pumps. And one of the criteria is the land holding that they have. They have the standard 1 HP and 2 HP pumps model, and with like a certain targeted land 1.67 and 3.34 acres of land requirement. But like average land holding in Nepal is 1.36, and most of the farmers are smallholders. Yeah, so these pumps are already quite oversized for most farmers and already very costly. Operation maintenance has been an issue. The pumps comes with 2 years after sale service, but the lack of local technicians, the quality of installations has been an issue. The private sector are interested to do like to grow the market, but like due to the government subsidy program, most of these farmers are receiving the pumps for free. 60% subsidized by the federal government, and the remaining money is subsidized by the local government. The farmers are getting the pump for free, so they are not willing to put in money to buy these pumps. So they are thinking that they can probably get the pumps for free. Why do we invest? So my solution is because like most of the farmers are smallholders, and let's target farmers, the smallholder farmers who are cultivating vegetables, which means that the water requirement would not be that high. So my idea is to intervene with the micro solar irrigation pumps with a fee for service model. So the farmers won't own the system; they'll just pay for the water, and an entrepreneur in the village will sell water to these farmers. And my idea is to go with a sub HP, half HP pumps, and the cost would be less than $1,000. So right now, the current cost that is defined by the government is around like 1 HP pump costs around $3,000, and 2 HP pumps cost around $5,000. So the cost is quite high. So decreasing the cost of the pumps with the smaller pumps, it's very easy to get the returns on the investment for the entrepreneurs. And integrating those pumps with drip and sprinklers, we can cover larger areas, and it's quite suitable for vegetable farmers. So as I said, like we target farmers that are already doing high value vegetable crops, fruits and agriculture, and we want to go to the districts where the government program already hasn't reached. And also, they should be interest from the financial sector to finance these pumps, and also from the private sector, local government, NGOs, or entrepreneur to willing to take up this entrepreneur model. So this brings to the research question that I have. So basically, the research question is fee-for-service model for the microsolar irrigation pump in Nepal more suitable for smallholder farmers? And I have two hypotheses here. The first one is the fee-for-service model will offer better sustainability, maintenance, and user satisfaction than the individual ownership. And farmers will prefer the fee-for-service model over the individual ownership because the lack of O&M headache that they need to take care of, and also the investment that they need to have. The literature basically shows, the Tarai belt in Nepal is rich in groundwater resources, and the energy to draw this groundwater is an issue. So solar irrigation has been a promising option, but with the solar irrigation, the quality of installation, O&M services, high upfront cost has been the challenges, and there hasn't been many business model that has been tried in Nepal. There has been one project by EC-Mode that piloted few business model back in 2016-17, but the scenario was different. Nepal has a different federal government structure, and there was no government solar irrigation program back then. So the scenario has changed, and it's time to probably do a scalable pilot of the business model that can go back to the government and try to direct their subsidy policy to scale solar irrigation here. So I have the methodology is basically I propose a fee-for-service model that will be subsidized 50%. 50% will be an equity from the farmers, and 35% financing will be there for the entrepreneur. And the outcome of interest here is the sustainability of the system, the agriculture productivity, and the inclusion in, like, who are getting the pumps actually. Are these smallholder, marginalized, or women farmers? I propose to use mixed methods, qualitative and quantitative both. So using quantitative method, basically deploying differences or propensity score matching to basically determine the impact of this intervention, and also a quantitative data using KIA and focus group discussion, because the sample size that I have proposed, the budget constraint is limited. So qualitative data is also necessary to get the assess the impact. And also, there are already few microsolar irrigation pumps that are already installed. Probably we need to survey them as well to try to compare the microsolar irrigation individual ownership versus the fee-for-service model. The target selection criteria for the farmers would be the vegetable, like the farmers needs to be cultivating vegetable already. They need to have access to the vegetable market. There's no market distortion due to the government solar irrigation program. Microfinance institutions that are willing to invest into this sort of projects. Water source availability, there has to be groundwater or other water sources available. And there has to be entrepreneur that is interested to the project. So this is my last slide. So why is this research important? So in terms of policy impact, the policy in Nepal is waiting for like what next for solar irrigation, and probably a model, scalable business model for them would be a good direction to move ahead. And as I also said, that there hasn't been much study on business model in Nepal, and that's value addition to the literature that this project can bring. So with this, I'd like to end my presentation, and I just want to highlight one thing here. So here I talk about in the context of Nepal, this policy research, but I while doing the literature review, I looked at literature from like various African countries and various countries. Like I right now I'm in Bihar, India. It's quite relevant for like most of this developing nations. So probably even though it's right now I'm proposing for Nepal, but this can easily be done for like other developing countries with similar context. With this, I'm at the end. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Shishir. And right on time, so nice presentation. And so again, so I see some questions coming into the chat. June, a couple of them are directed to you. Feel free to take a look and respond there if you'd like, but we'll also come back to them in the Q&A. And in the meantime, folks, if you have questions for Shishir or suggestions as well, feel free to put them there. So last but not least, we'll hear from Visa, who's joining us, I think, from Zambia. And the floor is yours, Visa. I think you're on mute still.
You are seeing the presenter view?
No, we see just the slide.
Oh, okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you once again, SETI, for this opportunity to just present what we were able to work with excitingly in Cape Town and really grow in terms of, for me, research. My name is Wizaso Muntali. I am currently a lecturer at Copperbelt University in Zambia in the Copperbelt province. There, I lecture under the School of Mines and Mineral Sciences, Environmental Engineering Department. I was brought in to fill in a gap on environmental management, regulation, and policy. And my PhD research has taken me into the area of energy transition, which I'm really enjoying currently. Okay, so my study focuses on the disadoption in energy-poor communities in Zambia, with a focus on area located in Lusaka city known as Kamanga Compound. Now, I'll start with asking the question, why all this fuss around cook-stove energy transition? Why should we care? So there's been over 20 years of work in this area, so many designs of cook stoves that have come onto the market in developing countries, and Zambia is no exception. And one of the biggest issues has been the failure of these ICSs, improved cook stoves, to be sustained on the market and really have a big market share and make a difference in terms of providing that cleaner option for especially poor communities like Kamanga in Lusaka. So why Kamanga for my study? I picked Kamanga because it defines a common type of residential setting in the Zambian urban environment. Kamanga is an informal settlement. It's located in Lusaka city, established initially as a rural migrant settlement for those coming from the rural areas looking for employment in the urban settings. It's characterized by low-income households, low literacy, and these compounds, like Kamanga, tend to have a very strong dependency on charcoal for cooking, despite being connected, most of them being connected now to the electricity grid. And because of this, they have been a target for improved cook-stove deployment in Lusaka. So, for example, Vitalite has been marketing and selling what is known as the improved EcoZoom charcoal efficient stove as far back as 2017 in Kamanga, thus providing an opportunity for me to assess the EcoZoom uptake dynamics playing out in Kamanga. Now, just to be clear, Kamanga was chosen because there was already an intervention, but there are so many other compounds that would benefit to such a study and have these similar characteristics. So I really just aim to investigate what has led to the disadoption of the EcoZoom within Kamanga. So in Zambia, I'll start by giving you an idea of how traditional cooking in this urban setting looks like in terms of the technology that's available. In Zambia, our traditional cook stove is called the Mbaula. It uses charcoal as its main energy source, and charcoal in Zambia is mainly produced and sustainably from native Miombo forest. Like I said, the Mbaula is produced locally from scrap metal and typically sells between $1 to $5, depending on the size. On the other hand, the EcoZoom is an imported improved cook stove made from steel, boasts of a clay thermal line to minimize heat loss, and has a manual heating control mechanism. It is reported to have an efficiency of about 47%, much higher than that of the Mbaula, and sells for about $14. So in terms of literature out there, there's quite a lot of literature that talks about barriers surrounding continued use or sustained use of improved cook stoves. A few studies have been done in Zambia, but the study I happened to come across was on a competing improved cook stove known as the Minimoto gasifier stove. And the authors go to elaborate and explain what sort of challenges the uptake of this improved cook stove is facing based on the perceptions of the users. Some of the issues that come out are things to do with functionality, as well as cost and so on and so forth. None has been done on the ecosystem itself in Zambia. And I thought this would be an opportunity to try and understand what is leading to this reduced use of the same within the Zambian context, within the targeted energy poor communities like Kamanga, and try to look for some way that unique solutions, policy solutions could be provided to or replicated to compounds that are facing the same challenge with interventions such as this type. So my research questions are three research questions. The first one being, what factors drive disadoption and reduced use of the ecozoom in Kamanga? Do disadoption rates vary across cookstove user experiences? What is the most preferred improved household cookstove technology in Kamanga? I think the last one really is driving towards the idea of, look, we may be pushing something that the people don't want, and could we have an opportunity to just get an idea of, if these people had to be given something cleaner, something improved, what would they prefer? And hopefully this would provoke or embrace more sustained use. In terms of methods, I intend to use secondary data collected in Kamanga by the Energy Poverty Pyre for Southern Africa program, of which I am an affiliate. This study undertook the Zambia Clean Cookstove Survey in Kamanga and two other compounds of Lusaka City in 2019. And this was followed by an endline study in 2021. The whole idea was to create this data set that provides information on a variety of aspects surrounding household cooking energy, of which cookstove ownership and use is included. So it must be mentioned that the proposed study also serves as an extension of my PhD research on cooking energy transitions in Zambia. So I thought it would be good to give you a snapshot of how cookstove use looks like in these types of communities, and what the data so far collected from EPSA is showing. So focusing on primary cookstove transitions, that is the most frequently used cookstoves in these households, we follow what usage has been like from 2019 up to the end of 2021. So for the Mbaula itself, we see for primary cooking from 2019 and then going back in 2021, households, about 14% of households have taken on using this cookstove again as a primary cookstove. For the improved Mbaula, which is a locally produced Mbaula in Zambia, which boasts to be slightly more superior to the traditional Mbaula, there's been this overwhelming uptake as a primary stove in the household. So more and more households want to use it as a primary cookstove, and we see this over 100% households shifting and making this their primary cookstove. And then for the EcoZoom, we see this reduction in use as a primary cookstove. So it may be going into secondary or tertiary level in terms of usage of the household. So this offers that support that I'm saying there's this reduction in the EcoZoom, and why is that so? So the sampling method I will use, or should I say, I will use stratified random sampling from a given sample of 299 households, which is a subset from the bigger study by EPSA. I will divide this or stratify this into houses that disadopted the EcoZoom, houses that reduced use, that is reduced from primary to secondary or down to tertiary, and then those that continued use. It's important to stratify the sample to get some form of understanding as to why the different groups are having this different response to the same ecosystem. They were given, we will assume that they were given the same marketing, given the same pricing. So what is it that is causing these different outcomes in terms of how they use the stove within their households? And then I will also create subsamples from these three strata. And in those subsamples, carry out a choice experiment in which I will just simply ask a household to state from a list of cook stoves, which is their most preferred, to give us that understanding of generally between the three groups, what sort of stove to them would mean cleaner, modern, and efficient for them. So in terms of policy response, disadoption factors linked to design and functionality will be used to inform the development of improved cook stoves. Where we're seeing cook stoves that are tailored to the user and should institute this quality of standards for improved cook stoves in the country, which currently are not there. Disadoption factors also would provide lessons learned that can be avoided in the presence of guidelines for improved cook stoves deployed that mitigate these factors. Disadoption factors, particularly linked to finance, can propel subsidy deployment of improved cook stoves. And disadoption factors could also define a clear path for household cooking energy transition, such as a stronger emphasis maybe on leapfrogging the energy ladder to electricity-based cooking. In conclusion, understanding why disadoption and reduced use of the ecozoom has occurred in Kamanga is important to direct energy transition, not only speaking to Kamanga, but any other settings that fall within the characteristics of Kamanga. Outcomes from this study will provide evidence-based recommendation towards a more achievable approach to cooking energy transition in urban poor communities of Zambia. Thank you.
Thank you, Visa.
Yeah.
And so let's all give Visa a hand of applause. All right, so thanks for those excellent presentations, and maybe I'll turn it over next to Amin for some brief reflections on, both the course and the presentations, how they got to this stage, and yeah. Amin.
Yes. Right. Thank you, Mark, and thank you everybody who is present online on this platform. Right. So my brief comment on the course, or my reflections on the course before I comment briefly on the presentation, not questions, basically, because I leave that to the larger community here, since I've always been, well, over the few weeks we've been together here in Cape Town, we had the chance to discuss some of these issues. Right. So my reflection on the course is as follows. Basically, we know it's not that easy to get policymakers and researchers to talk to each other, to realize and, what the key challenges are, what kind of research gaps are needed, and what kind of evidence can the policymakers take from that. This is basically due to many issues, one being that the political cycle often doesn't coincide with scientific studies, in the sense that we need some time to provide evidence if you want to be regular and all that. Meanwhile, the politicians, they want to solve things immediately, and therefore that gap in terms of the timing always pose a challenge. And the fact also that, of course, sometimes the policymakers are not the final decision makers when it comes to the implementation and design of the policy. They still have to talk to whoever that's in charge especially the government in power, based on their priority needs or what they think that is of essence. And therefore, we do have this challenge. And therefore, having these policymakers being part of a course that try to bring the researchers and the policymakers together to think about these key challenges in the energy transition perspective was quite useful and eye-opening for some of them, especially some of the researchers in the course, right? Because when they are designing their research proposal and doing their research, they are more interested in, well, which journal are we able to publish? How can I contribute? What gaps are there to be able to motivate and be able to publish in those journals, right? But we hardly reflect so much about what are the key policy needs that we want to solve with our research. Usually we end up at the end of it and say, okay, our research will solve this and that and that and that. But that's afterthought or when we are done with our design, And that reflection actually showed in the course, especially some of the researchers. They say, oh, okay, we reflected. Now we are reflecting more, trying to think about what is the policy relevant research question to design. So that's a very important and useful reflection I had from the course. Another is about the fact that some of the policymakers also want hands-on knowledge, right, on some of the key methodologies that are available or that we have introduced them throughout the course. And I think that's refreshing in the sense that they just don't want you to provide them evidence, but they should be able to understand what evidence you are providing them, and sometimes possibly also contribute. And that's also a good reflection based, on the materials covered in the course. That's something we need to think about, basically, because we didn't provide the hands-on that much in the course because we didn't have that time to do that. Besides, we also felt that the policymakers might be more interested in the discussions around these issues, not necessarily the hands-on by themselves. And this reflection going forward, we might have to incorporate that in some of these short courses. Right, so I leave it there because there are other reflections that will come through the question and answer section. And I'll go into the presentations. It's clear that each of them tend to deal with important energy challenges in the global south. One being the modern cooked fuel like LPG, the barriers associated with that, and how it provides some opportunities that we can tap on, especially in the, if you are able to create a business model and scale it up. Another being that is common in over the years that we've been trying to promote the adoption of clean cook fuels and also the appliances for those, like improved cook stoves. But the evidence also shows that after the initial uptake of these improved cook stoves, we don't often see more frequent usage of this, in the sense that sometimes we even see this adoption of it. And that's common across the sub-Saharan Africa. And therefore, a research that deals with that is not only important, but it's also timely. And the other one tackle an important issue that leverage renewable energy to deal with an important productivity perspective, especially for agriculture. That's solar irrigation. And especially if you look at climate change effects in the global south, especially those in the Sahel areas, this is an important thing to mitigate or adapt towards climate change in terms of rainfall agriculture, right? And therefore, if we have a business model that can be created in terms of the example he gave, in terms of fee for service, and if it's, because we know the upfront cost for this is always high for the smallholder, but if this business model tends to be operational and effective, its applicability will be very huge in the case of sub-Saharan Africa. And of course, it's not only for that, it also helps in terms of livelihood, it also helps in terms of fighting climate change issues and gender perspective. Especially we know most women are the main, they occupy the smallholder farming arena in most of these developing countries, especially sub-Saharan Africa. Right, so the key issues they cover here are important. Of course, you can't cover everything within one team, in one proposal. I know there are few areas within each proposal that can tackle other aspects. And I could see already from the charts, those aspects are being brought in. But based on what the time and the focus, I think these are quite useful proposals and tackling key aspects of the energy system in the global south. I will add a remark. We experience various subsidies in the LPG market by various countries in Africa with various level of success. And, Ghana have done that, but we haven't been very successful compared to Senegal, right? So in that case, what can Ghana learn from Senegal? Or what can Uganda learn from Senegal? And things like that also become useful. Of course, Senegal is still struggling to also have more uptake, but they've been relatively successful compared to Ghana. And therefore, the policies they've implemented over the time to achieve that might be useful to learn from. And of course, also focusing on an area where there was a ban for charcoal, trying to target promoting LPG in that area, lead to so-called policy coherence, and therefore the benefits of such policy coherence might be very useful in that context. And also focusing on the low-income households might be also very useful, because we know when these subsidies are off, the low-income households will not be at the right place to be able to continue using this LPG and improved cook stoves. And therefore, the market and sustainability perspective is important. I leave it here, Mark.
Thank you very much, Amin, for those comments and detailed comments, very helpful. Okay, so I think I'm going to go to the chat now, just to follow up on a couple of points, which I think might still be hanging. Shishir, do you want to go first in terms of this discussion about sort of testing different business models alongside each other, and how you would think about that, and how it could be done, particularly in the context of what you are proposing as a research agenda? Because I think you had in mind sort of an initial phase of gathering a little bit more information before doing sort of a larger scale testing. But go ahead.
So one of the comments that I received was very interesting and pretty relevant. Like right now, like I propose, like in the business model, there has to be some sort of subsidy because to make it easy for the entrepreneur to come on board, and there has to be some sort of like equity from the entrepreneur to if it is absolutely free for him, like there will not be an ownership. And financing, that will enable him or her to motivate to generate income through water sales. So that will like those three components needs to be there in terms of like what size what size subsidy or what size of equity and loan that might be after consultation with the local stakeholders, that might change, the number might change. That was one interesting feedback that I have received. The other one is, like I said, like there has been already lots of micro solar irrigation individual ownership. So one of my methodology proposes to study these, what has been happening. Are they selling water, like individual owner, are they selling water to their neighbors already? So those sort of study already needs to be there. So right now I am in Bihar in India to see this fee for service model that are implemented here. And one thing that I noticed is the quality of installation, like how long lasting are the installation, that is important. And the land fragmentation in Bihar and in Nepal is quite similar. The land holdings are quite small. That determines what size of pumps we need to install. So it's not right now I'm proposing a micro solar irrigation, but like it might suit one context, but for other contexts, they might be like different sizes of pumps may be required. Yeah.
Thanks. Visa, let's go to you next, because Philip had a question for you in the chat, which I can read. I guess the disadoption and reduced use of EcoZoom could be due to competition from local cooking devices like Mbala with relatively lower efficiency performance. This brings the issue of the actual users not really caring about efficiency as the ultimate goal, but how compatible such interventions are with their own cooking needs. If the traditional cooking stove, Mbala, seems favored by users, should policymakers be thinking about how to improve this technology, thus paying attention to local entrepreneurship and so forth? Do you have a reaction, or do you want to take that up?
Thank you, Philip. Yeah, thank you. Here's the thing. Here's a situation where an intervention has gone into an area at the moment not doing too well in terms of seeing these cook stoves being of primary use, an imported intervention. And then there's a local initiative to create something that seems to offer something that is more superior to the traditional Mbala. So you have the improved Mbala that everyone seems to be more willing to take on. Here are the issues. It's definitely cheaper than the EcoZoom, one. Two, another issue is that in terms of replacing of parts and so on, that would also be cheaper because it is produced locally. I don't see this as a long-term fix, but as we try to figure out why the EcoZoom isn't getting the sort of response that we would have liked it to get, why not invest in a local product? But that local product needs to have guidelines on how it's produced, some quality control, so that it's really selling what it says it's selling. As it stands now, I have not come across literature that gives me some estimates on what emissions are like when it comes to using the improved cook stove and its efficiency level. So why not create a standard in the interim as we try and sort out why the more upgraded versions or imported versions are not being used more frequently. Thanks.
Thank you, Riza. And then let's go over back to June. June, hope you're still there. I think there were some questions that you answered. I don't know if you want to offer any additional comments on those, but then I don't know if you saw Maxi's last comment. So Maxi says, how do you think about potential international pressure to increase the prices of fossil fuels like LPG via carbon taxes, and how that could interact with this sort of desire to make LPG more affordable and the cost of LPG for local consumers in Uganda? June, are you there?
Yes, Mark, thank you. I'm actually thinking about how to respond to that. because for Uganda's case, like, I mean, like for us, it's very, very unique because besides the potential to, I mean, the pressure to increase the prices of fossil fuels, we are going into commercial oil production. So these are things that we need to think about, right? But the biggest question that we've had so far, or the biggest backlash that we've faced, is the fact that we are producing oil when the rest of the world is, you know, being advised to transition away from fossil fuels, right? And the biggest, I mean, the reasoning that our government gives is that, first of all, we need this money from fossil fuels, right, to fund our just energy transition plan, because we don't have money, right, to, I mean, scale up access to clean cooking energy. Say, for example, we need money to implement some of those initiatives. But other than that, I mean, even with the commercial oil production, there's a potential to produce gas, which we are going to produce as part of, you know, the oil and gas production, right? There's already infrastructure that's being set up to support maybe storage and production of gas in these different oil fields. So ideally, that should sort of like, I mean, gas is still considered a fossil fuel, but it's cleaner. It's cleaner than using, you know, the dirty fuels I was talking about, the charcoal and the firewood. So it's sort of, I mean, it's what should I say? I can't say it's a win-win, but it's just the way we are looking at it. Like, say, as Uganda, it's very unique to us, right? First, we need the finances, but then again, there's potential to solve other problems like increasing access to cleaner cooking energy, right, from oil and gas production. So it's a very unique opportunity and challenge at the same time. I don't really know how to put it, but at the end of the day, as a government, we still plan to transition, right? Say, but then our horizon might even be longer, maybe 2065, because our oil reserves are not that high, right? So it's very, very unique. It's something that we need to think about carefully. But then again, it goes back to the general discussion that, I mean, the energy transition is unique. I mean, to different countries, we have unique problems, right? So it's important that we look at countries in isolation, right? Because one plan doesn't fit all, right? We have unique challenges that we need to finance, we need to find money for, and yeah, and we need to solve. So I'm not too sure I've answered Max's question. Yeah, because it's a very complex situation for us. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that thoughtful response. I don't know if Maxi wants to follow up, but I might just offer one point of view, which is that you know, it's important to sort of think about that energy exploitation plan strategically, right? So one of the discussions that was happening in South Africa when I was there was whether South Africa should develop offshore oil because it has that potential, but it hasn't really been exploited. And the argument that was being made against it was that this is going to be expensive oil exploitation relative to the cheapest in the world, like the Saudis, who basically to compete with the Saudis, you have to have very, very cheap oil. And if, as the prices of these fossil fuels increase, like it's going to become a less dependable sort of development strategy. But on the other hand, if you think about, so there is that risk, right, that Uganda faces if it's trying to export oil. But on the other hand, for the local consumption, it may make a lot of sense, right? Particularly if Uganda is able to, separate itself from and not import oil supplies. But then the opportunity cost is what it could earn on the global market with that oil. So, the economics have to be thought about carefully. With the LPG question in particular in cooking, people don't always realize this, but if you're in a place where there's a lot of deforestation pressure, actually LPG is net positive for the climate, but that's very locally context specific. So because it burns so much more efficiently, and you're not chopping down all these forests, and also including sort of other climate forcing pollutants besides CO2, like black carbon. But that's a very contextual thing, and that could support a case for cooking energy in LPG, but doesn't necessarily support the broader case for oil and gas development, which sort of depends on those other factors. Anyway, my own contribution to that discussion. Maxi, I don't know if you want to follow up at all.
Yeah, thank very much, June and Mark, for this discussion, and I can completely follow this line of argumentation that you gave, June. And I'm seeing that many institutions are pushing for carbon prices, carbon taxes, and also for sub-Saharan African countries. And I was just curious, like, whether this is discussed in Uganda, and what is your perspective on this. So I wasn't saying Uganda shouldn't promote LPG. I was just curious to hear like how the line of arguments goes in Uganda. So I think that's very insightful and super interesting. So thanks for that.
Okay. Max, I get your question. I get where you're coming from. Do you mean in the sense that are we thinking about implementing carbon taxes in Uganda already as part of, the global discussion on
yeah, for
climate?
example, I mean, if there are discussions about carbon prices, this would increase the prices also for LPG, right? And then it is even harder I'm seeing a risk in making people adopt LPG now, and then maybe over the coming years there will be more pressure also like from the international community on countries to implement carbon prices. And then it's somehow a risky strategy to make people rely on LPG.
Oh, okay. I get it. And just to respond briefly, from what Mark added, that I mean, say for it's very country specific. I mean, like the challenges are very unique and also very challenging in the global context. For how governments should come up with solutions to some of these issues or the risks that could come with some of these initiatives, like you say, the carbon taxes, right? But then again, like he said, for Uganda, we have among the highest deforestation rates in the world, right? So the fact that we are considering producing LPG locally, for us is a net benefit, right? So I guess the question comes in like, I mean, after maybe if these deposits run out, what happens, right? If we are going to sell gas locally at very, very low cost, then what happens after? Will it be sustainable? Also, I mean, if we have to import this gas and then there's a tax on top of that gas, will it be sustainable? These are things we need to think about as we design some of these policies, right? So it's a very interesting angle to look at and possibly something to consider while we are designing some of these policies. Yeah, thank you for that. It's a light bulb moment for me, really.
Thanks. Shisher, there's another question for you in the chat from Marta. In different contexts, there are complaints of thefts of components of solar water pumps and lack of technicians for repair and maintenance. Are these issues in Nepal? And then are micro SPI movable and easier to store in a safe place or easier to replace components for and repair?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, the local technician availability is an issue, and theft is also an issue. The site that I went to see today, the model that has been implemented in Bihar, the technicians, who they has always been informal water market in this part of the world. So previously they used to use diesel pumps to sell water. So what they have cleverly done is identify these water sellers who were using these diesel pumps and who are the local residents, and trying to make them the water entrepreneur for solar irrigation pumps. So in that sense, they have already have the know-how to repair this or do the first-hand repair, and they already have this know-how of selling at a cheaper rate than what they used to, and they are making lots of money. And in some cases, they are getting return on investment for within 2 years. So that's quite good. Theft is an issue, but theft happens when for larger pumps, they are anti-theft loopholes that you can install. You can install pump house and lock in the pump. So those sort of measures can be done. And you can also do insurance. If they are theft, then you can claim the insurance. So that can be done. But what I'm proposing is a microsolar irrigation that is movable. So if it's not used, they can bring the system back home and be safer from that.
Thank you, Shishir.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat. Maybe I'll take the chair's prerogative and ask a question myself, which is not specific to the presentations, but for our presenters. For those of you who sort of identify as researchers, and Shishir, that might be you, the question is, what are your suggestions for researchers who are seeking to have more policy impact, and reflect on that a little bit? And Wiza, if you want to identify yourself as a researcher, you can do that as well, although you also have a background working for environmental protection in Zambia. So you can also wait for the practitioner question if you would prefer. But Shishir, why don't you go first?
In my case, the project that I'm working on, it is already tied to policy implementation. So we are already working very closely with the government, and we are working designing our research based on the policy question that they have. And we have already had some positive outcomes. For example, previously the selection criteria of the government did there was no role of local government. So that policy was planned before the federal structure now, and when the local government that were more closer to the farmers, but they didn't have any role for the local government. So with our recommendations, they included all the application needs to have recommendation letter from the local government. So local government is recommending to whom to give the subsidy. So that's the role is there. The other aspect is the land requirement. Previously they were mostly targeting 1SP2. These are engineers. At this organization called AEPC that is promoting renewable energy. So these are engineers designing 1SP, 2SP pump, and they don't know for 1SP pump for this much land size, but the average land holding is lower. No? But we recommended we need to decrease that land, at least they need to be qualified to apply for this sort of subsidized pumps. So they decrease the land size, and they are also prioritizing. One out of the three successful application needs to be a women farmer from a particular local government. So there has been already a sort of positive policy changes, but it's very difficult to work with the government because their pace of delivering changes and our pace of recommending is not synchronized. So we have to be very patient, but it's slightly easier in Nepal because the policy makers listen. But my colleagues in India would differ. It's very difficult to get hold of the bureaucrats here in India, but it depends on the country.
And were you able to embed this research agenda into the policymaking process from the beginning, or did that happen by building confidence between parties, and how was that done?
So our donor was particularly keen on onboarding the government partners for the project even before like we had an inception back in 2019, and we brought the local policymakers together, try to see like what they really want, rather than like we designing our research questions and agenda. Like we ask like what they want, and then we that based on that we build our activities, research activities for our project. So it was not an afterthought. It was like well planned, even during the already.
Yeah, so that's a good point to emphasize that researchers often think that they should just do the research and then deliver the message to policymakers, and policymakers will accept it, right? But that's a very naive view of the policymaking process, and it's much more effective in general to engage in those interactions from the start of the project and at the design stage, because then you get this buy-in and you're sort of actually answering the questions that they've sort of agreed are the important questions, and sometimes even suggested. So I want to emphasize that point, and I'm glad you brought it up. Luisa, do you want to take this question or do you want to wait?
I'll wait.
Okay. So for on more of the practice side, and June, I'm looking especially at you, but Luisa, feel free to jump in too. What do you see as the key challenges that your organizations face or that decision makers face in trying to use evidence from research studies to craft more effective policy? And what are the things that make that difficult? And what do you have suggestions for strategies that would help avoid or overcome those challenges?
Thank you, Mark. There are many challenges, but one that I can pick up first, right, is the fact that most of these policies or incentives, they are backed by some political ambitions, or so when politicians are implementing certain policies, they won't wait for evidence-based research, right? It's either it's going to increase popularity in the next election, things like that. So what I can think of like immediately is political interference when it comes to policy implementation or even design of some of these policies, especially those that are, just come up out of the blue. I mean, like, they're not backed by research, right? So it becomes hard to implement them or even achieve the effectiveness that they intend to achieve, if there's any, right? Besides political support wherever they're to be implemented. So that's one of the biggest challenges. Yeah, that's what I can think of as the most pressing challenge for us is political interference. Yeah.
And any
the fact that
suggestions?
politicians won't wait for evidence-based research, to, implement certain incentives. Yeah.
Any suggestions for ways to overcome that?
That's a challenging one. Yeah, it's a challenging one. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I need to think about it a bit more. Yeah, because I mean, looking at some of these policies that have just come out of political interests, unless they fail, implementation fails, and they're just thrown out of the window, it's a bit hard to think about how to even go around them, right? Given that the motivation is never really, something that's feasible, right, to implement. Yeah. Of course, the other challenges are, maybe lack of funding for research, right? I mean, I can't think of like an adequate budget that we have to fund research and development, right? Though this is changing in the context of energy, right? I mean, like for Uganda, we have really scaled up financing for research and development, especially in the transport sector. The government is currently funding research and development in manufacturing electric vehicles, right, in Uganda. But even then, I mean, that's going on right now. But in terms of implementation, it might be a bit challenging given, like, say, it goes back to the specific problems a country has. For Uganda, it might not necessarily be that, I mean, people cannot even afford normal cars. Now, electric cars, they are very expensive to manufacture. So how feasible is that, right? Even if a lot of money is going into research to support developing such vehicles. So it's, yeah, but it's a step in the right direction. At least our president, I mean, every year we have to fund, it's called Kira EV, right? The company that's dealing with the manufacturing electric vehicles, yeah. So it's a step in the right direction. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Just one kind of reaction on the difficulty of using evidence in the political process. I think one thing we talked about somewhat in the course when we were all together was that, yeah, I mean, at the very high kind of political level, it's hard to influence, you know, because people are fixated on the election and getting short-term results. And that, in some sense, you know, the concern about sustainability is like the last thing people want to think about, right? Because that's long-term, it's beyond the election, it's never going to influence how people think about that current administration. But nonetheless, within, you know, governments and civil society organizations, there is value in creating sort of this culture of wanting evidence-based policymaking, because those sort of, you know, technocrats within the government can sometimes have influence, and that's something that people said. In the U.S., you know, this is seen negatively by some people. People call it the deep state, right? Where these people are doing things that politicians don't want, but you know, in some ways, there's value in that. Wiza, I don't know if you want to react to either of these two questions and have the last word here, as we're almost out of time.
Just a quick one. Just responding to what June said. I think in the Zambian context, having worked as a practitioner in environmental regulation, I think one of the issues was this political interference, and not being able to carry out your work, you know, diligently because there's this interference hanging over your shoulder. Another thing also has been funding into research. And I think in addition to funding, there's realizing the value of research, how research can help speak to better policies. I think when I worked as a regulator, I'll be honest, I didn't understand that connection. It's only this interaction that I'm now having in the research world, attending sort of the Cape Town type of environments, realizing I'm really not achieving anything if my work will not seriously speak to the problems out there. It even got me questioning my current proposal that I presented. What are the big issues? Right now, we have like 12 to 15 hours of load shedding. Maybe I should be focusing on that, you know, but not to say that cook stoves are not an issue, but it wakes you up to understanding that you must be fighting to fix those things that are quite pertinent. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a nice way to end. So just one last word here, and then I think Cristobal will corral us for the next part of the agenda. Is that, you know, as I mentioned, there were sort of 27 proposals that were put forward, and we are still providing feedback, detailed feedback to the respondents on the proposers on those proposals. But as part of that feedback, we will also be asking, you know, if people want their proposals to be sort of shared with the network more broadly as opportunities to do work in this area, partnering with researchers or policymakers who are thinking about particular questions. So we will try to help facilitate some of that matchmaking to the degree that it's desired by the proposers, who may also have their own views of how they want to create their team. But that should be coming, and keep your eyes open for kind of a brief summary of each of the proposals, and then contact information that would be associated with those projects. So with that, I'll stop, and let's give everyone a hand of applause again for this session, and then turn it back to Cristobal.
Okay, so thank you very much, June, teacher Luisa, and also Mark and Amin for this very good policy session. Well, if you want to follow up on the discussion, you know that you can reach out to me. This is for presenters and also for attendees. You have my email, my contact, so we can extend this conversation further. Okay, so, well, continuing with our program, we have now the official picture, but while we prepare for the picture and inviting you to turn on your cameras, it is obviously understandable if you don't want to be part of, but I completely invite you and happily invite you to turn on your cameras, prepare your big smiles to prepare for this annual workshop picture. Meanwhile, I want to inform you that we have 3 parallel resource sessions. We have economic incentives for a sustainable energy transition. We have energy demand, and also we have gendered and just energy transitions. They're all almost in 10 minutes. They will start. So if you want to join them, be sure that you check the program before attending the sessions. Tomorrow we also will have another plenary session, which is a very important one because we will have flash talks from most of them postgraduate students. That's a very important pillar of our collaborative program. So we invite you all to participate and provide feedback tomorrow in that session. And we will also have 3 more parallel sessions on access to clean energy, sustainable energy transitions in Africa, and green energy policies in the Global South. So I invite you to stay tuned on that information. So, well, I see that still some people don't have their cameras on, but I will make the impression that they don't want to be part of it. It's completely okay. So I invite you to smile, and yeah, I saw someone else turn on their camera. Maybe just 10 seconds, and okay. I'm going now, so invite you to put a happy face there. 1, okay, let's put another one. I saw Maxi just moved. Let's try again. And one last one, because there is some people that don't appear in my screen. Just going now. And yes. Okay, so I will leave you free. We will have a 10 minutes break, and I will see you then in the parallel sessions. Thank you everyone for joining. Bye.
Thanks. Thanks.